So it's April 24th, 2025, and I just finished, it's not Epictetus, Epictetus, the Stoic Classics collection, the Discourses, and the Enchiridian of Epictetus. So Enchiridian sounds like something you get at a Mexican food restaurant, but I'm not sure what that word translates to. But there's basically two books in one in this collection. And I'm going to go into a lot of depth on this because to this point, I have read perhaps the best of the philosophers. When I do an AI search on who the best philosophers of Stoicism or Stoics are, was Marcus Aurelius, which I read his review, his works on Stoicism and reviewed it prior. I also did Seneca, and that was the best book I read last year. And I did a review on that one as well. And I read a whole bunch of Plato's works, which a lot of it is about Socrates. And if your only exposure to Socrates is that you watch Bill and Ted's Adventure with them bringing him back into the future, you're missing out, because there's a lot of good stuff in Plato's writings about Socrates. His death is very poignant, sad, but not at the same time, because he was a Stoic. So a lot of what the Stoics deal with is death, and then everyday other things. I took a lot of notes. Well, not a lot of notes, but I took some notes as I went through this. The first majority of the book is the Discourses, and that runs to page 113. And then the remainder of the book to 136 is the Enchiridian. So the first thing I'm going to tackle here is, if you've not taken a philosophy class in college or something like that, you probably wonder, what is it in the first place? It's a study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. So most people don't ever read anything from philosophers, and it may be that they just think it's unnecessary, or it could be that someone has told them that they don't need to read it because it's contrary to what they already believe. And that's discussed in this book also, is that people in general come up with their own belief system, and then that's all they operate on. They don't try to learn anything new or improve themselves because they believe that they're already great. And that's the first hurdle, is if you don't believe that you can improve yourself, you're already in a bad position. So a lot of the writings here talk about how animals don't try to improve themselves because they don't know any better. So the question is, are you better than an animal? Now, that question has been posed to a lot of people about being a gentleman in modern day society. What does it mean, right? The rules and regulations that we're supposed to live by and follow are purposeful. But if no one does them, they become mute, not necessary, right? Because we've devolved into a bunch of animals that just worry about our desires and things of that nature. So I'm going to take a while on this. What is philosophy? I'll throw you a little anecdote in here first. I've got these, just as I went through the book, I wrote some things down, and I'm going to go in order. That logic is necessary. When one of those who were present said, "Persuade me that logic is necessary," he replied, "Do you wish me to prove this to you?" The answer was yes. Then I must use a demonstrative form of speech. This was granted. How then will you know if I am cheating you by my argument? The man was silent. Do you see, said Epictetus, that you yourself are admitting that logic is necessary? If without it you cannot know so much as this, whether logic is necessary or not necessary. He couldn't even come to terms with the rules of how he was going to explain whether logic was necessary or not, and the rules themselves required logic. Part of this book, like I said, if you want to better yourself, you have to learn. And a lot of it is overcoming bad habits. I'm going to come back to that in a while. It's also appreciating the gifts of God. And this is where I'm going to diverge a little bit, because I wore a shirt, a Seneca shirt. I have a shirt of him because it was the best book I read in all of 2024. And I read over 60 books last year, because it is very helpful to realize the things that are outside your control and how you should react to them, in and up to including death and things of that nature. How you can respond to it, because ultimately you have no control over it at all. But I was raised in church. I'm a believer. As many of you know on my channel, I'm a believer. I've been to churches that encourage independent research, and I've been to churches that kind of discourage it a little bit. And there's reasons for encouragement and discouragement, right? Encouragement is so someone can reaffirm what they already believe. Discouragement would be either you're afraid they're going to get off the beaten path and read something that's contrary to the central message that you want to live your life by, or the other one is that you want to maintain a certain amount of control over a person. And some churches do that to, a degree, whether it's a small degree or a lot, depends on the place. One of my family members was looking at my shirt and asked my wife, "What is that shirt?" She has a look on her face like, is that a cult leader, or what's that on that guy's shirt? My wife tells him that's one of the Stoic philosophers. And my husband reads a lot, and he's got a Stoic philosopher shirt on. So when someone is encountering that situation, they're left with a couple of possibilities. One would be, hey, let's dig into this deeper, find out what it means. In this book here, it says, do not tell anyone your philosophy, but show them. In other words, don't go around preaching what you believe in your philosophy. Just show them. And that's kind of like I like the shirt of showing the philosopher, because Seneca, is because it exposes someone to an idea, and then they have the choice of whether they want to research that person and what he was about or not. And it's real easy to say, oh, that's a guy from ancient history and what he had to say didn't matter. But he roamed this earth, and it's kind of like the statue of the thinking man, right? At some point, people are thinking about what we're doing here, where we're going, what we're going to try to achieve while we're here. And the goal of the Stoics, according to Epictetus, is to look at God and find out what is his attributes and try to become more like that, rather than being like an animal that is just hunting out pleasures and food and things of that nature. You have to try to think about becoming a better person and gaining traits of truth and knowledge and, ethics, things of that nature. Now, I'll tell you, people in the modern day world don't really know probably where colleges came from. There's, again, a lot of churches that kind of rag on college as secular knowledge. But the thing is, our modern day college system came from the Greek philosophers. And it wasn't just thinking about the nature of man and how we relate to God and, what is ethical and what is not ethical. They also created chemistry and biology and math and different languages and all of these things that became the basis of Greek education carried over to a modern American education system. So all of those early thinkers formed what is modern day education. And you don't have a person in America right now, except for maybe some fringe religious groups, that don't go to the doctor and take advantage of the services they have there, or go to their tax person has learned economics from ancient Greek economics philosophies, right? There's many of these biological studies that create things that are used at the doctor's office, and people readily accept that knowledge, but yet they tend to not want to accept any philosophy knowledge, right? Without reading any of it themselves. And you could find that a lot of these philosophies, beliefs, whatever you want to call them, are not contrary to Christian belief. They're very sympathetic. And you got to understand, these people back then at this time were not exposed to Jesus and his teachings at all. So they were hunting out, trying to be ethical and a better person without the benefit of the Bible and things of that nature. So we covered, is logic necessary? And it clearly is necessary, because it leads to all of these different benefits of knowledge, right? And then overcoming bad habits. So I'll describe this about the Bible is a timeline, basically. It goes from Old Testament to New. And it's not organized in subjects. It's organized in parables and histories, and it goes from beginning to end, and it's got all kinds of interweaved ideas and thoughts. And it's not a very big book. And a lot of churches will tell you that it's the only book that you need to read. And I'll just tell you straight up, that isn't true. Now, while that is the most impactful book ever, in my opinion, for me, is definitely the most impactful book. You are not going to learn everything you know or need to know from the Bible. You're not going to learn math. You're not going to learn chemistry, biology, economics. A lot of these things are not in there at all. And as far as the things you should do and should not do, the people that formed the Bible collectively didn't have a lot of years to put that thing together. I mean, Jesus only lived 33 years, and he had a big, important mission, right? His mission was very important. And his teachings were short parables, and a lot of them very impactful teachings, right? But some things like, the 10 Commandments, right? Thou shalt not do this. They're very small, fragmentary bits of information. So I'll give you an example about lying, right? You shouldn't lie. It's in the Bible. But a lot of people tend to kind of make excuses for something that they don't want to accept as a lie. They make an alternate justification of what truth is or is not. So there's a big section in here about what truth is and how to discover what truth is. And then once you have truth, what's the next step and how to make sure that you're being truthful? There's a lot of teachings in here that give you lessons on how to make sure that you kind of stay on that path of being truthful and measuring yourself. So it goes into more depth than just don't tell a lie. So the basis in the Bible of this is something you shouldn't do, this book went into depth on how you can make sure you're not doing that bad thing, right? And it's very helpful. And the reason that I started reading the Stoic philosophers, other than I'd already been exposed to Socrates through Plato, and I really admired a lot of things I read in that book, I learned that Stoicism was the ability to accept things that are outside your control, and it keeps you from getting upset about those things, right? Because a lot of things, if you're a fairly intelligent person, you can look at the world and go, what is going on here? But you can't fix it. You can't change it. You can change how you react to it, and that's about it. And that's the goal of Stoicism, is how to react to some of this stuff. So we got appreciating the gifts of God, And then standing up to tyrants and not worrying about the penalties, right? So a lot of the philosophers, including Socrates, were killed or banished or punished in some kind of way. And then I'm going to read you this quote. I'm going to check it off so I don't come back to it again. And this is a truncated version of the quote. The quote's longer than this, but I kind of shortened it. If you desire philosophy, prepare yourself to be ridiculed. If you abide in it, men who ridiculed you will admire you. So in other words, if you adopt these things, eventually they will see that what you're saying made some sense and that you just didn't say it, that you did it. And that's part of the reason why this book suggests don't explain your philosophy, be your philosophy. So ultimately, if a tyrant says, hey, I can put you to death, and the guy says, yeah, you can do that if it makes you feel better. So that is kind of the parallel between Pontius Pilate and Jesus, right? He says, don't you know I have the power to free you or whatever? And Jesus said, you have no power over me whatsoever. Now that was a little different because he was on God's mission and it was ordained. But an average person, if they're facing the same kind of thing, an unjust tribunal or whatever you want to call it, it's ultimately the same principle in this book. It explains that if you've accepted all of your possible fates at the very beginning, that whatever God allows to happen to you is okay. It's already ordained. There's nothing you can do about it. If God says it's worthwhile, then it's worthwhile. Now I'm going to shift gears because this is page 77. I thought this was interesting, the bottom of this. That we ought with caution to enter into familiar intercourse with men. Now they're not talking about sexual, obviously. They're talking about speech. I'm going to jump to the part. For if a man places a piece of quenched charcoal close to a piece that is burning, either the quenched charcoal will quench the other, or the burning charcoal will light that which is quenched. Since then the danger is so great, we must cautiously enter into such intimacies with those of the common sort. And remember that it's impossible that a man can keep company with one who is covered with soot without being partaker of the soot himself. I thought that was pretty good. So it's like, don't hang around with bad people. And then talking about kind of similar people that portray themselves as dark or villainous, maybe with a lot of wicked tattoos or something of that nature, and they're unkempt. He was talking about cleanliness, but he's also talking about, them looking in disorder. It says, go and talk to a hog and tell him not to roll in the mud. In other words, that's what a hog does. That's what they do. They're going to be a hog. So don't hang around with people like that. And then it also talked about, this reminded me of office politics. It says, be careful if you talk to a person in street clothes that's berating Caesar and trying to get you to speak bad of him because he could be a guard in plain clothes trying to cast you off in chains. And I've had that situation in office politics a lot of time where they talk about the boss and try to get you to say something. So be careful in that regard. I'm going to jump to page 132. Now, this is in the second half of the book. This is section 44. These reasonings do not cohere. I am richer than you, therefore I am better than you. Or I am more eloquent than you, therefore I am better than you. On the contrary, these rather cohere. I am richer than you, therefore my possessions are greater than yours. That's the reality. Rich people are not better than you. They just have more possessions. I am more eloquent than you, therefore my speech is superior to yours. But you are neither possession nor speech. I thought that was a good one. And then page 51, or item 51 on page 135. The first and most necessary place in philosophy is the use of theorems. For instance, that we must not lie. The second part is that of demonstrations. For instance, how is it proved that we ought not to lie? The third is that which is confirmatory of these two and explanatory. For example, how is this a demonstration? For what is a demonstration? What is consequence? What is contradiction? What is truth? What is falsehood? And it goes into, again, how to know the difference between being honest and not honest, measuring yourself, making sure that you stick to that on a regular basis so that you're improving and that you're not being dishonest with yourself. And then it talked about if someone is basically bad-mouthing you and they list a list of bad things about you, you can answer, well, that simply cannot be their assessment of me, because if it was their assessment of me, they would have included this fault, that fault, and this fault as well. And they didn't. Therefore, that must not be their actual assessment. In other words, don't be afraid of someone saying that you're deficient, because we all are, and we've got probably more deficiencies than they even know about. And you have to be willing to accept that right off the bat. And if that ain't a Christian philosophy, I don't know what it is, that we have a lot of faults that we need to work on. And if this book helps you to address some of your faults because it goes into greater detail than perhaps the scriptures does, then I believe I have successfully argued that philosophy is a worthwhile addition to your reading, and it is also another piece of information that adds to the puzzle of what it is to improve yourself, what it is to try to become a better person that's more like the traits of God, and how to better react to situations outside your control. This is a great book. I loved it. And this may end up being the best book of the year again. So like I said, at this point, if you're interested in Stoicism, you would like to look up Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Socrates, which is through Plato's writings. And I purchased a shirt that's going to have several of those philosophers on it. There's other Stoics. Confucius was Stoic to a degree, it seemed like. His stuff was more perhaps governmental, some of it. So that might be a little bit above the personal level, but still very good. Confucius was very good. And I don't, again, believe that a lot of this is contrary to Christian beliefs. Now, there are some that say, look up the counterpoint just so that my arguments are fair. I told you this video would be a little bit longer. Are there any contrary teachings? Let's see. Is Stoic philosophy contrary to Christian beliefs? Now, one thing they'll say is that it makes you a little bit more aloof if you're a Stoic, that you tend to be less involved with other people. So that would be one of the downfalls, perhaps, of Stoicism, if you allow that to happen. So it says Stoicism emphasizes a self-reliance and rational approach to life, while Christianity centers on faith in God and love. You can integrate both, and there's no reason why you can't. So similarities are the virtue ethics. Both Stoicism and Christianity place a high value on virtuous living, emphasizing wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Self-control. Stoicism focuses on self-control and resilience in the face of adversity, and it's a common theme in Christian teachings about sanctification and living a disciplined life. Importance of reason. Both philosophies acknowledge the importance of reason and rational thought in understanding the world and guiding one's actions. The differences, the sources of authority. Stoicism relies on reason and the natural world, while Christianity emphasizes faith in God as the ultimate resource of truth and guidance. Well, I will say this. Epictetus mentions the relationship with God many times in here. And I'll be truthful because they were not exposed to Christ. He referred to the gods a few times and Zeus a few times. Now, that doesn't mean that his attempt to reach out to a higher power was wrong or askew. As much knowledge as he had at his time, that's what he had. So he was not a bad person or a corrupt person trying to be more like what he believed to be God. And the scriptures talk about people that weren't exposed to Christ, how they'll be judged according to their knowledge. So God's going to assess those people in his own way. Okay, so the view of God, Stoicism, particularly in its early forms, often had a more detached or impersonal view of God, while Christianity centers on a loving and involved God who seeks a relationship with humanity. Again, that's because of their lack of exposure to Christ and his teachings. So that's not to be faulted on their part. Purpose of life. Stoicism aims for, I don't know what this word means, it's a flourishing life through living in accordance with virtue and accepting what one cannot control. Christianity emphasizes salvation and eternal life through faith in Jesus Christ. Now, your belief in your faith, it is one major component of your life, but you can also have virtue and accepting things that you cannot control as another piece. There's nothing wrong with that, and they can coincide. Focus on emotions. Stoicism often emphasizes emotional detachment and resilience in the face of adversity, while Christianity encourages the cultivation of love, compassion, and joy, even in the face of suffering. So I guess that would be a fair criticism of Stoicism, is that perhaps it's a little bit too logical / cold, but it may favor a person whose nature is already kind of more logical than emotional. But again, there's no reason that those two things can't mesh together and or apply to a person that more is that typecast than the other typecast. There's all kinds of different people, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And your beliefs can still match up with that angle. And then the last thing is view of the world. Stoicism views the world as a natural order governed by reason and fate, while Christianity sees the world created by God that can be shaped through human agency and divine intervention. So, yeah, the fate thing, that's kind of like in the Bible. They talk about predestination, that God knew you in the womb and he knows ultimately what's going to happen to you. But then the question becomes, well, then can you change your fate? And Christianity teaches that you can, that grace can save you from, your ultimate doom. And it seems to me like, again, it's more accepting things that are outside your control rather than thinking maybe perhaps that's just fate and there's nothing I can do about it. You could kind of merge those two also if you believe you can make changes that will change an outcome of a bad situation. So this says, conclusion. While Stoicism can offer valuable insights into living a virtuous and resilient life, its focus on self-reliance and rationality differs from Christianity's emphasis on faith, love, and the divine relationship with God. But I would say if you believe in the divine relationship with God, you can still have logic and try to do some of these things that make you more ethical at the same time. It's kind of like a roadmap for just being a better person, which ultimately it's something that's important in the Bible too. It wants you to be a good person. So I hope you appreciate my feelings on this book. If you're not a believer, Also, you should read the Bible. You should read Epictetus Stoic Classics Collection if you're interested in it, and also in the Bible if you're interested in it, and you should be, because that book is more impactful than this one or any other book, really.